Hi, my name is Lauren Woods and I work with UT Extension. I am the Family and Consumer Science Agent in Knox County, Tennessee. So basically what I get to do is come and talk to you about really fun things like knife cuts. We talk about sanitation and safety. We talk about different cooking methods. And so today I'm going to start talking to you about some different knife cuts. So if you have never worked in a kitchen before, or maybe you're kind of new to it, but you've never had an array of knives at your disposal, the first thing I wanted to talk about are the different knives that we have. My first knife here is a Santoku knife. So it is a Japanese style knife. And a lot of times they'll have these little divots on the edge of them, and that is so when you're cutting vegetables, the vegetables don't stick to your knife. It's a really nice safety feature. It keeps you from accidentally slipping. But this knife in particular is really good for vegetables, and that's what it is generally intended for. Another knife you might have is just a simple paring knife. I think this is the sort of thing that most of us have at home. A lot of us are probably cutting things we shouldn't be cutting with paring knives. But I know, for example, my grandmother or my mom, they will do absolutely everything with a paring knife in a kitchen. And it is very versatile, but it shouldn't be doing everything. Another thing that you have is a utility knife. Now, my little utility knife here is a serrated utility knife, meaning that it has the little scalloped edges, so it's really good for things like tomatoes and bread. Maybe not as great for more delicate things like chicken or fish or something along those lines, but it is super useful as well. But my favorite knife, and the one that I have brought to you completely wrapped up because I baby it, is my chef's knife. It is an 8-inch chef's knife. And it is one that I tend to be very careful with, but it is my most versatile knife in the kitchen, and you probably have some form of this in the kitchens that you're working in. This knife is really good for vegetables, fish, chicken, beef, whatever it is that you want to do. And this is the one that I'm going to use to demonstrate some knife cuts for you today. So have you ever been reading a recipe and thought, I don't know exactly what they mean by dice or chop, or sometimes even your recipe might say julienne? I'm going to show you exactly what that means. But the first thing we're going to do is stabilize our cutting board. So my little cutting board is just one of these little plastic ones. It actually has a rubber backing on it to keep it from sliding. But if you want a little extra protection, you can wet a paper towel and stick it under your cutting board. Now, a lot of the more plastic, hard plastic cutting boards won't have the grippies on them. They do make them that do, but usually you're not going to have that. And so you can put a wet paper towel under it, just like I did with this one. Another thing you can use is the gripping that they use in drawers to hold things in place. You can actually stick a piece of that under your cutting board as well, and your cutting board won't be going anywhere. So we're going to practice on potatoes today. And the reason we're going to use potatoes is most of us have them in the kitchen. The other reason is once you cut them up, you can cook them and you can eat them for dinner. And I think that is a wonderful thing. I'm using two different types of potatoes. I'm using sweet potatoes, which in general are usually a little harder. But I'm also going to use just a regular white potato, just for a little compare and contrast. And I'm going to dry them off real quick. You want to make sure that your vegetables are dry when you go to cook them. Or when you go to cut them, sorry, not cook them, so that your knife doesn't slip. But you can see my potato is a little on the lumpy side because when I peeled it, I wasn't super careful about peeling it. And one of the things that you want to do is kind of even your potato out. So I guess it would help a little bit if I showed you the best way to hold a knife. I mentioned that this is my favorite knife, and the best way to hold it is to take your thumb and your forefinger and you pinch right above the handle, and then you wrap your fingers around the handle. A lot of us tend to just grab onto the handle, and that really doesn't give you a lot of control over your knife. So thumb and forefinger, pinch the top of the blade, and wrap your fingers around it. The other thing you're gonna do is make what I like to call a hoof out of your other hand. So what you're doing is keeping your fingers protected when you are holding onto a vegetable or a piece of meat or something that you're cutting. So we are going to flatten this out so I have a good surface to work on. And you're just going to take that extra potato that you don't need anymore and put it in water, and that'll keep it from going brown. So I'm going to even this out a little more and set my potato over here. And the first thing I'm going to show you how to do is called a julienne. And I think a lot of us hear that term, but we never necessarily know exactly what that means. A julienne is an 1/8 inch square long cut, and I'll show you exactly what that is. If you take your first joint of your thumb, that's about 1 inch. Some of us have bigger hands, some of us have smaller, but I think this is close enough for government work. And I work for the government, so I feel like that's a pretty good trade-off. Half of that is going to be 1/2 inch. Half of that's going to be 1/4 inch. Another half is going to be 1/8 inch. So you can use your thumb to measure that. And then you just take your little hoof, or sometimes I call it a bear claw, depending on who I'm working with. Children really like to pretend it's a bear claw. And you're gonna look right over your blade. And this way, if you're staring right over your blade, you're less likely to make a crooked cut. But so you're gonna make that first little slice, and then you're gonna go and measure another 1/8 inch, and you're gonna have a little square julienne. So then you go again, and you never pick up the tip of your blade. That keeps you from cutting yourself. And you have a little stack of julienne. Now, what you can take and do after this is a very, very small dice. Its technical name is a brunoise, but we're gonna call it a very, very small dice. So, because you're not gonna really see that in recipes. Again, you're gonna hold onto it with your little hoof or bear claw, and you're gonna cut straight through there. And never pick up that blade of your knife. Just do a gentle rocking motion. As long as the blade stays down, you're less likely to cut yourself. So then you have our tiny, tiny dice. Now what if you want something a little bigger, which you might, and we're gonna use our sweet potato this time, just to mix it up a little bit. So if you want something a little bigger, you can do what is actually called a bâtonnet. And you can tell the sweet potato is a lot harder than the regular potato. We're gonna even up our sides there, set those aside to become mashed potatoes later as well, because mashed sweet potatoes are just as good as regular potatoes. Now the bâtonnet is actually a 1/4 inch instead of 1/8 inch, so remember, half your thumb is half. Half of that is going to be 1/4 inch. So you can kind of measure that on your potato, and it doesn't have to be perfect. None of us are trying to work for Gordon Ramsay right now, so we are good. You have your little flat piece, and then you're gonna do another one just like it. And you're gonna keep pushing with your fingers down like that. And I didn't quite cut all the way through, but you're gonna have a little long piece. It's bigger than a julienne. And the cut off of that is actually what is known as a small dice. So if the one before was a tiny dice, this is a small dice. We even them up, and you're just gonna cut through them again. You want them to be about 1/4 inch big again, but it's okay if they're not perfect. So you'll have all of your little small dice. Set these over here. So if you really just want to do something larger, that you don't really want something quite that small, you're gonna do a large dice. And I'm gonna flip my potato over so that I have a more stable surface to work with. Even it out again. And this time we're gonna do almost all of the length of your thumb. So it is 3/4 inch, or that first joint of your thumb, not your whole thumb. That'd be quite a large cut. And we're gonna go and do another 3/4 inch. And then when you cut off of those, you're gonna have your large dice. So you may be using this to do something like roasting. Because if you're roasting something for a long period of time, a larger cut like this isn't going to get super crispy or inedible. It's actually gonna have a crispy outside and a soft inside. You can do a medium dice, which is gonna be just a little smaller than that, but still the same concept. Or you can even do a rough dice. So if you don't want to mess with everything being the same size, you can cut it kind of however you want. And you have these different little size pieces. Maybe you cut something different earlier and you have these leftover chunks. A rough chop is really just going to be whatever you want it to be, all the different sizes. Now this might be good for something like soup. where it doesn't really matter as much what your sizes are, as long as they're not hugely different. And you may ask me why that is, why that really matters. Well, because when things are larger, they have a different cooking time than when things are smaller. So if you say you have a roast and you're putting potatoes in with your roast, your small potatoes are gonna get done a lot faster than your large potatoes. By the time your roast is done, you want your potatoes to be done. So you may end up with really small mushy potatoes and really large hard potatoes, but you really want that happy median right in between. Now, one of the things that I was asked to kind of mention is, what about cooking for large groups? Well, when you're cooking for large groups, you can use all of these techniques that we just talked about. You're going to be cutting a lot if you're cooking for large groups, but probably your best friend in the world is going to be your sheet pan. You can actually put everything on the sheet pan and let a lot of items cook at once. You know, if you're used to cooking at home, then maybe you're not used to cooking for a lot of people, unless you have a giant Italian family like I do, and then I don't know how to cook for small amounts of people. Makes cooking just for yourself really interesting, right? But you are going to use your sheet pan, and that is what you're going to lay everything out on, and that's going to make it a lot easier for you to cook things evenly because everything's cooking on the same type of surface. Another thing to think about when you are cooking, though, and I touched on it a little bit when I talked about using different parts of the potato, is food waste. So you may have all these little tiny pieces that you didn't use, and you don't need to put it in whatever it is you're cooking at that point in time. We're going to save it for later. We're going to put everything back in the water to keep it from turning brown, and save all of that for later to make sure that if you don't need it for the roast you're cooking today, maybe you need it for the mashed potatoes you're cooking tomorrow. And that is an excellent way to actually keep food costs down. You know, food waste is a huge problem in the United States in particular. We actually waste somewhere around 60% of the food in the food system. That's a lot. We consume tons and tons of food every year. So that is quite a lot of food waste. So we want to be really careful, especially when, you know, we're kind of in charge of budgets and doing affordable menus for the facilities that we're working in. So one of the things that you can think about when you are prepping your food based on your menu is, what are you going to need the next couple of days? So if you are cutting those potatoes, you're thinking about what you can use those potatoes for the next day. If you're doing something like cutting broccoli for a snack time, maybe you can take those broccoli stems and leaves and turn it into a soup the next day, or maybe maybe into some sort of casserole later on. Something else to think about is fruit. When your fruit starts to get a little soft, you can cook it down or you can puree it. Apples aren't the only things that can become a sauce, so you can have pear sauce, applesauce, any type of sauce that you would like it to be. And another thing that you can think about is when you're cooking something like a protein, like chicken, when you have leftovers, you can cut that up and put that into other things. I think I've said soup like 3 times at this point, but if you want to, you can take your leftover chicken, cut it into these dices that I just showed you how to do, and add it to a soup so that you can have some wonderful soup. I mean, we're going into that time of year, right? So why not make some soups? But that is actually all I have for you today. We do have a post survey that we would love if you took. And remember, my name is Lauren, so if you ever have any questions, you can call any of your extension agents across the state. Thank you.